Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Disabilities X. It's a new series where I speak to inspirational people with disabilities, but unlike the original podcast, this series, all the episodes will have a theme, and the very first theme is about females and disabilities. We'll kick off the show in a second, but please, if you like listening to this podcast, make sure to like, follow, share, and subscribe, and send a letter by AML, pigeon, or email to beyonddisabilitiespodcast@gmail.com. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce my first guest on the series, Sophie and Laura, otherwise known as Girls Interrupting. So thank you both for joining me. Please, could you start by introducing yourselves and disabilities? Sophie, can you go first, please?
Yes. Hi, I'm Sophie. I am 30 I was going to say 32, 31, 31 years old. And I have dyspraxia and ADHD.
And hi, I'm Laura, and I'm a whole decade older than Sophie, so I'm 41, and I have dyspraxia, and I'm also diagnosed with autism, and non-diagnosed, but believe I have ADHD.
Oh, thank you very much, both of you, for taking the time to joining me on the podcast. So, Sophie, can you start first? Please, can you explain when you were first diagnosed with your disabilities and the process of how you were diagnosed?
Yes. So I always had difficulties, and I got to the age of 19 before pursuing a formal diagnosis with dyspraxia. I think at that time it wasn't really known about for my parents or myself to be able to put a name on it. It was only when the internet started becoming what it is today, where it would have even occurred to them or me to consider the possibility. I pursued a formal diagnosis privately, in between jobs, when I was out of education, and we paid a private educational psychologist, and I was diagnosed with dyspraxia, mild dyslexia, and Erling syndrome. And, it gave me a lot of answers. I'm just very, very lucky to have been able to go private. Otherwise, I never would have known.
And Laura, can you do the same, please, in Spain when you were first diagnosed and your process of getting your diagnoses?
Yeah, sure. And I think I grew up, with that 10 years difference from Sophie. And I think that shows in many ways as well, in that, I grew up in the 1980s and 1990s. Yeah. I clearly had issues. Dyspraxia, for those that don't know, is primarily a movement and coordination disorder. And I didn't walk, I didn't crawl, I just sat there as a toddler and didn't move. So from a very young age, I was under the hospital from about age 2 until about age 16, where they knew I had some quite significant problems, even walking. I struggled to walk at all. Even as an adult, I still have issues. But they didn't know why in the 1980s. They kept x-raying me and looking for a physical problem. And I went through school with, assistance and support, but no diagnosis in the 80s because it just didn't exist as a concept. And then in the 90s, because although they recognized that I had special needs, I was achieving well at school academically. So I just don't think they felt there was the need to have to do anything. But I knew I had dyspraxia at that point, and I've always known I'm dyspraxic, but I only formally got a diagnosis when I was 39. And that was spurred on by the fact that I'd lost my dad. So my dad had passed away, and he'd done a lot for me. And also I'd really realized how dependent I was on some other people in my life for being able to do things. And I think losing a parent scares you and makes you realize, if I was on my own, I'd really struggle. So I wanted to get it formally recognized. The autism diagnosis is much more recent, only in the last few months, and that's much more of a surprise to me. But when I was going through the dyspraxia diagnosis and some other research work that I'd done since, the clinicians kept saying, pretty sure you're autistic as well. And I was like, no, I don't think so. Not being in complete denial of it, but just really not seeing that in myself. And had the diagnosis, and apparently I am autistic. So I'm still, I think, still coming to terms with it, not in a negative way, but in understanding what that means for me, I think.
No, it's interesting that both of you say, especially with the dyspraxia diagnosis, like you seem to have been. So I got diagnosed, to give you some background, with autism dyspraxia quite early on when I was 2 years old. And similar to you, Laura, it wasn't much, although slightly different. It was a district nurse came round who was doing her checks, and she noticed that I wasn't sort of interacting with people, and I wasn't sort of walking properly and hitting the developmental milestones I should have been. So that's how I got my diagnosis, after she recommended my mum pursue it. But hearing you both being diagnosed so late, do you think that, in particular in females, do you think it's harder to get diagnosed, even if you think that you've got a potential disability yourself, compared to males? Go to you, Sophie, first.
I think that, based on the statistics, it does imply that women are diagnosed much later in life. People's personalities and stereotypes play into it massively. I look back, and I don't know whether a part of it for me would have been being in the sticks and in a rural area. I think that will have played a part in terms of people knowing about certain things. And I was in a very, very small schools, smaller classes. And I can just, whenever I look back, really, I can just see why it was missed. And when parents don't know what to look for, especially in girls, it just makes me look back how, and I don't blame anybody. I think things are starting to change slowly, and it's really great to see.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. What about you, Laura?
Yeah, what Sophie says really resonates with me as well. I think there's a crucial period of time for diagnosis in childhood, actually, and I think that's where girls get missed, which is in those early years. So, James, you saying, the district nurse had seen you and picked up that there was that problem, but I think because of the prevailing stereotypes for autism, certainly that autism tends to be white males is the stereotype, and for girls, dyspraxia wasn't even a consideration, despite the fact that was clearly a problem for me. But I think once it got past about the age of 7 or 8, which is where teachers were more concerned with the fact I couldn't hold a pen, or I couldn't get dressed, or I, was struggling to use stairs. Once you start getting towards secondary school, actually teachers' priorities are they getting good grades? Are they concentrating in class? Are they being disruptive? I was never disruptive. I was the girl who, would work hard, incredibly hard, and try and not be noticed, to be honest, for my difficulties. But I was also still the girl that couldn't wash her hair or get dressed easily on her own. None of that had changed. But I think the priorities for the people around you in the world changes, and they're not looking for those things, which makes it more and more difficult then to get the help that you need. And my mum certainly has told me that, when I was 13, 14 years old and still couldn't find my way to school on my own, still really struggling with a lot of executive functioning skills as well. My mum was going, Laura needs help. And the answers she was getting back is, well, Laura's a straight A grade student. She's doing fine. Yeah, I was doing fine academically, but I wasn't doing fine in other areas. So I think, unfortunately, that has got better, but it's still the case for girls today, that they'll often slip through the net because they mask and are able to cover up so many of these difficulties, especially girls who are, I don't like the term at all myself anymore, but, high functioning or able to cope, but actually really you're not functioning. You're just having to put in an extreme amount of effort to get by in the world, and there's payback for that at some point. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of women who are over the age of 18 really starting with that information Sophie spoke about on the internet, starting to see themselves and thinking, what, this makes sense now. Like I get it now. I get why I was finding everything so hard as a child.
I've got a few friends who are women who recently, after years and years, like finally got their diagnosis, because it's like exactly what you said. Like, I think women in particular, it is harder because all the diagnosis process are based on, like you said, white males, especially. And I think that doesn't just apply to autism, but dyspraxia as well and other disabilities. Like, it just got one standard sheet, if you like, and it's hard to identify in females. But I think it's slowly changing. But I think the internet's helped. And weirdly, I know a couple of people who, through TikTok, that's helped. And I know people started to seek diagnosis through that. Not that it's a medical tool at all, but starting to see people openly talk about their disabilities, and people like you with your own podcast, I think, are definitely helping. So both of you do fantastic work about raising awareness, especially of dyspraxia, through Girls Interrupting. Like, please, if you're listening, give them a follow on Instagram and listen to it, like, and look at their content. So how did Girls Interrupted start, and what was sort of like the aims and goals of Girls Interrupting, and how did you both meet?
It's really...
Can I be a real pain? Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Sophie, can I be a real pain and go first?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Because I was going to say, we've never met each other in person, have we, Sophie? No. Only on the internet, which I think surprises some people. Yeah. But I came across Sophie because I read a piece of writing that she wrote, which was entitled Life in the Headlights. I think I've got that right, Sophie, but a long form piece of writing about her life with dyspraxia as a woman. And I was sat there going, yeah, this is me, this is me, this is me, this is me. And it was just so moving and well written. And, you know, I did a bit of internet snooping to find out more about Sophie, but I think it also just really highlighted me. I'd never read an article like the one she'd written. No. Because all of the articles for dyspraxia were out there primarily about boys, and I mean boys, not men as well. Yeah. So about children. And I'd not read something by a grown woman that I could relate to in that way. So I basically then got in touch with Sophie and was like, can we talk? And I'll let you go from there, Sophie.
It's so lovely how, you know, just putting something out there about your own experience can just connect you to other people. And, you know, that first step can be the step to something amazing. And just connecting with Laura has become something that's a real community. And you know, it really just grew out of having conversations about what we want to see for dyspraxia for women, and realizing that, like, women are lacking representation, and also not just lacking representation, but lacking a space to share their own personal experience. And you know, we never would have thought that we would have such a wonderful reception. And you know, I don't know about you, Laura, but I just feel so much more like, I just feel so connected and so supported. Even though we've never met, I feel so supported by you, and also supported by all of the women on our page.
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe we hadn't expected this, but it really is a global community as well. So, you know, we've had some really interesting conversations where other women will say, well, this isn't what we're doing in Canada, or this isn't what we're doing in Australia. And, you know, that's been really enlightening and enriching. I think also worth saying that, you know, Sophie and I cannot possibly represent every woman's experience of having dyspraxia. We're from a certain age group. We're both white. We're very aware of that, and that there are other, you know, intersecting issues that affect people's experiences with dyspraxia. But I think what we're really aiming to do with Girls Interrupting is have an honest space where people can feel okay to ask the stupid questions. And I've been so aware of the great like role models that are already out there in the neuro kind of diversity space around autism or around ADHD or dyslexia for women. And there just, as Sophie said, hasn't really been that same level of representation around dyspraxia. And you know, for me, I've gained so much from some of those other communities where you're able to just go and think, oh, it's not just me. Yeah, it's not, I'm not alone.
Oh, that's really lovely to hear. I know what you mean. Like when you start connecting with people in the neurodiverse community, so how I found you is for a post one of my friends, Athena, did on your page where you spotlighted her, and then that's how I found you. And I knew I wanted to relaunch the podcast and have it more focused on certain things. So I was like, I want to get you both on the podcast because I think it's such an important topic to do. So where would you like Girls Interrupting to go? What would be your sort of aims and goals like for the future, if you have any?
Yeah, I think that between me and Laura and the community as a whole, it's listening to what all of the women want to see. And, even when you get one comment about, from any woman that's following us about something that they want to know about or something that they'd like to see, it's about, as we grow, getting a feeling from everyone. There's endless possibilities. We would love to do a retreat one day where we get all the women together in person. The potential for a podcast. It would just be absolutely amazing one day to be able to meet all these women and get together. But I don't know what me and Laura haven't had much of a chat about it because we've been letting it grow naturally. Yeah. But I do, I think that the future holds all sorts of things for us, which is amazing.
I think it's as well like almost testing as we go, which I think a lot of people in these communities do, right? But where we're releasing sort of series, and you mentioned the spotlighting, that's been quite popular, the Woman Crush Wednesday, but where we feature different women, and we'd love to broaden that out and have different voices and different perspectives shared through that. Kind of recognizing there's women already out there doing amazing things in their own right. I think also just, respecting the fact that, a bit like you as well, James, a lot of us are doing this in our spare time as volunteers, I guess, this kind of work, if we want to call it that. But I think it's because we recognise that need, but also get enjoyment from being able to share too. But as Sophie said, I feel the same. I'd rather this grows slowly and grows well and does that with like collaboration and consensus and from the whole community, then try and rush and do everything and do it badly. So we're taking our time, but enjoying every step as we go, I think.
No, that's really lovely. And you can see that you've got a lovely community on Girls Interrupted page, and that you're inspiring so many people to be brave and talk about openly about their disabilities, especially with dyspraxia, because I know that growing up for me, and it's not an easy disability to have. Like there's so many things that other people who don't have the disability take for granted, like riding a bike, doing shoelaces and other things like that, all sort of coordination activities that we'll just got to accept that we might not be able to do or find our own way of doing it. So going to talk about more personally about the disabilities for both of you now. Growing up, did you require any extra support with your disabilities, or were there things you found difficult, or also maybe dyspraxia brought like positives to your lives?
Well, see, it's difficult when you look back and you never knew what you had.
Yeah.
Because, even though my parents or the people around me will have known that I had complex needs, without the research, without the information, A, you don't know how to help yourself, and B, the people around how to help. So I think that, I was struggling in various areas, including school, work, socially, and I was around good people, but people are just doing their best and they're just guessing, and it was the same with me. So I think that I'm very lucky that I did have support around me, but the problem is how knowing how to support yourself and knowing how to ask for help. So I guess the positives I would think about when I look back on having this condition is just I have this underlying like way of looking at things, which is that things aren't what they seem. And even when I didn't know what was wrong with me, I I knew that I wasn't what I seemed, and I knew that my intentions and my wants for myself were not being reflected by my behaviour. So I'm really grateful that that's the way I look at everything now. Like, I don't attach judgment to things. I always just things as open as possible without drawing any solid conclusions, and I think that really helps me in life, because I'm just taking things in and just rolling with it, and I think that's a nice way to be.
Oh, that's really lovely. How about you, Laura?
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate in lots of ways. I think I had, even though my parents didn't know why I was the way I was, they were incredibly supportive, and I know not everybody has that. And my mum, this speaks to something you said, James, my mum always said, maybe you're going to have to do it differently, but find your way of doing it. And really supported me to keep trying to do things in different ways, even though I'm sure both her and my dad got really frustrated with me sometimes as well. I think, and this is perhaps, something I'm still exploring, but the interplay of being dyspraxic and now, as I know, autistic, I was never really that fazed about what anyone else thought of me as a child, but I'm not sure if I actually even noticed what they thought of me, which is probably, slightly linked to my autism. But with the dyspraxia, I was very aware there were things I could not do. I could not use stairs throughout my entire childhood independently. So I needed support to go up and down stairs. And I think the thing is, often when people do think of dyspraxia, they will tend to think of things like the shoelaces and the riding the bike, which are a problem. But also there are people like myself with the gross motor skill side who are quite profoundly affected, in that I still can't use stairs independently. I require aids. I still can't, manage a knife and fork on my own very well. So these kinds of things, I think people are less aware of. And of course, we hide these away, right, out of shame as well, because I think if you have a physical disability, people understand why you can't use a staircase. Whereas if you're walking around the rest of the time seemingly looking as if you have no problem, it then is baffling to people why you suddenly can't do something. And of course, baffling to yourself as well sometimes, why you look at someone else doing something and it looks so easy, and then you go to do it and you just can't get your head around the movement required, which I think is a very difficult side of dyspraxia. But in response to the second part of your question, I think I've really learned to think about dyspraxia, yes, as a disability, but not as a deficit. It's not that I'm lacking something, it's a difference rather than a deficit. And I don't think society have caught up with that yet. But I think for all of us who are neurodivergent, there are advantages as well. Like, a big part of my strengths now around project management and being really organized. And that's actually come out of being incredibly disorganized as a young person and having to put a lot into play to cope with that. It's almost now become a strength because I've had to work so hard at it. So I think there are things that come out of it that are very positive, but that the best thing we can do for ourselves, and I think for children that we have in our lives who have got dyspraxia, is to just really encourage them to see it as a difference rather than a lack in themselves.
I think you both have absolutely lovely outlooks, and you're right. I agree. I don't think we should see it as a disability or disadvantage. It should be more, I don't want to say different, but you know what I mean? It should be an alternative way of doing things, that it's an alternative way of living, and that it does bring that advantages. I think, for example, with my autism, I think it makes autistic people are definitely more compassionate and empathetic than like neurotypical counterparts. I think it's definitely an advantage. And I'm like one of the biggest accomplishments I think for me that probably other people take advantage is that last year I managed to pass my driving test, and which I thought was I'd never be able to do when I was growing up. So I was like really happy about that. But I think it is trying to help, I don't want to say inspire people, try and make people with disabilities think about their disabilities differently and try and think of the positives if they can.
Yes. Okay.
So let me know if you think your disabilities, if they've had any impact on any friendships or relationships, or if you had to make any adjustments to your behaviour, or if other people have made adjustments to support you with your disabilities.
It's a really good question. I think that without a doubt, I've had quite a lot of difficulty in relationships. That sometimes it can feel like an imbalance in terms of the work that people have had to do for me. People can sometimes just slip into a carer role, and you can slip into codependence. Which that makes any sense at all. And it can be an uncomfortable position to be in, because just naturally, if somebody is stepping in and doing those things for you that take longer and just helping you when they see that you're struggling, it can mean that, it's difficult to try and give the same amount back when you're just trying to survive and get through the day. And so I think that's been one of the big difficulties, where there's been a guilt on my part, and me really relying on somebody in a way, especially in romantic relationships, that sometimes I don't want. I don't want somebody to do things for me. But I think there's another thing as well, where a lot of neurotypical people can struggle to let it be done, not to the optimum efficiency, to allow you to take longer, to do it slightly wrong, and for that to be okay. And I think that, for there to be more space for you to struggle, I think it's be healthier for the relationship, obviously depending on the context. But I think since I'm okay with my inefficiency, and it's really helpful if the people that are around me can become most comfortable with that too. If that makes any sense.
No, that does make sense. Like I agree with you. Like I've actually been told sometimes with previous friends, they're not friends now, but that they've felt like they've had to be a carer, but that's not what I want. I want to be independent. They felt like they had to take it on themselves to fulfill a carer role. Whereas like, I'm 30 now, I definitely don't, like, I'll accept help and ask for help if I need it, but I don't want someone to automatically just do it unless I'm really, really struggling. How about you, Laura?
I think I've had very different experiences, but also still problems. I think this might resonate with other women in particular listening, in that I think I've often had this problem of being perceived as too much by other people, quite intense. I've never been a big fan of small talk. And if I, one of my friends, who is still a good friend, described it this way quite affectionately. He said, when you friend hard. And I think that's true. Like when I go into a friendship, I will be quite full on, because I really care about that person, and I want to be a good friend, and I want to share myself with them and get to know them as well. Like I really value that depth of interaction, but I also do understand that not everybody feels so comfortable launching straight into like the deeper meaningful stuff, and that they need time to build up to that. And I think as I've got older, I've got better at not punishing myself in that way, but just kind of tempering, I guess, my curiosity a little bit about people, or about wanting to share, and trying to allow other people to have a bit more space and time if they need it. But equally, I've also learned to effectively not waste my time with people that are going to be judging me for being too loud or too vibrant or too passionate about things. They're probably just not my people. So I think I've also got better at channeling my energy into the friendships that matter. And I'm very fortunate. I've been married 15 years now, and I've got a husband who's, my friend as well, and, who really understands me well, but also can affectionately tell me to shut up sometimes where I'm going too far with things. So we're a good balance for each other. But I think it's still a work in progress. I'm still learning now about friendships. I'm still learning now about relationships. And And maybe that's something I'll always be learning, but I think that's okay. I think that's okay to be that way. And yeah, hopefully leads to healthier relationships in the long run.
Yeah, I think I definitely both resonate with both of you. I've been told I'm too much, but I'm very fortunate now that I have got, after 30 years, a small group of friends who like me fully and understand how I'm like and why I do certain things. So that's really nice to see. So what would you say are both of your proudest moments and biggest achievements, and what positives would you say? Actually, I've done that bit. Yeah, what are your proudest moments and biggest achievements? Sophie?
I love that question. And the reason I love that question is because I don't actually think I have ever answered it to myself. And recently I was reading through notes on my phone from years ago, and what I would love for myself and my dream in life. And my bar for myself was so simple. And, it's like you said earlier about never imagining that you'd be able to drive. And, for so many dyspraxic people, that isn't possible. And that must be so difficult for them. Ever considered for a minute that in my wildest dreams that I would be able to drive. And all I'd written down for myself was I wanted to write, I wanted a dog, and I wanted to drive. And those were so wildly impossible to me. And I have those things, and that's basically more than I ever would have thought. So, the fact, the small wins, just to say it out loud that I finished my degree, I am running a business, and that I drive a car, and that I run a household, is for me basically anything else from now on is a bonus.
Oh, that's all really lovely, and I agree. I think you really appreciate if you've got dyspraxia or any disability in particular, the things people take for granted. So yeah, no, you should be really proud of yourself for those. And what about you, Laura?
I don't set many boundaries for myself. I'm like the absolute opposite, where I think I can, I don't know, be a space woman or something, things that are definitely not going to achieve. But I've achieved quite a lot that I'm proud of. But I think the things that I'm proudest of are the things that are perhaps the world would see as less achievement worthy, but to me were big. And I suppose it is still a big thing as far as the world's concerned. But a few years ago, I did a marathon, which is obviously quite a big thing anyway. But I set it for myself because I can't even run properly. I run like a dinosaur, like a T-Rex, with my arms up in front of me. And I'm not a graceful runner. I look like Phoebe out of Friends, for anyone who's seen that episode where she runs. I'm awful to be next to, but my body that fails me so often, managed to run 26.2 miles. Not fast, amazing, not elegantly, zero grace, but it did that. And I kind of think, so for me, I was really proud of that, more than things I've perhaps achieved through work or I've achieved, in through education or other spheres, where I've always found those things easier. But yeah, the physical stuff, actually that was hard. That was really hard training for that, and I'm not doing another one.
That's amazing.
It's done. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well done. And so, final question: what advice would you give to anyone who's perhaps got a disability and maybe not feeling confident or is struggling?
Another question. I was thinking the other day about what the world would look like if there was the neurodivergence with the majority, and how neurotypical people would feel. And I think that neurotypical people would start to question a lot of their attributes and a lot of their qualities. So when you're outnumbered, you can feel like there's something wrong with you. But being a minority and having different needs, if there were all of these workplaces were majority neurodivergent, who knows what the world would look like in so many different ways. And I think the advice that I would give is just to think that when you are a fish out of water, that it's really hard not to look at yourself and question yourself, but really we are special and remarkable in ways that nobody else can think and nobody else can be. And that is magical. It really is, I think.
That's really lovely. How about you, Laura?
How am I meant to top that, Sophie? No, just one piece of advice, basically, that I think: speak to yourself as you would speak to a friend. Yeah. I think so many of us, especially those of us who are neurodivergent, are really good encouragers of others. We're, James, you mentioned the empathy. I think that is a strong feature for so many neurodivergent people. And we're very good at putting ourselves in other people's shoes. We're often far less compassionate about ourselves and, the struggles we might face. So speak to yourself as you would a good friend and build yourself up that way.
I love that.
That is beautiful. Yeah, and what a lovely way to end the podcast. I just want to say thank you both so much for coming on. It's been really lovely talking to you. And please, if you're listening to this, please look out on Girls Interrupted on Instagram and all other platforms. It is absolutely brilliant. Just want to say thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, James. It's been great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah.